The ink hadn't dried on the divorce decree when Robert Williams started laughing. He stood in Manhattan Superior Court adjusting his Brioni cuffs, convinced he'd just pulled off the heist of the century, dumping his boring wife Maggie while keeping the billion-dollar Williams Aerospace. His settlement: Maggie got $50,000, a rusted Honda Civic, and 6 months' rent on a Queens apartment. He kept the Tribeca penthouse, the Hamptons estate, the company, everything. He didn't know the woman sitting quietly across from him wasn't trembling with grief. She was checking her watch. He thought he was casting out a peasant. He had no idea he'd just handed the Queen his crown. Before we dive into this story, I want you to think about something. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they knew everything about you? Keep that question in mind, because what happens next will blow your mind. The air in courtroom 302 smelled of stale coffee and expensive lies. Outside New York, rain battered the heavy glass of the Center Street courthouse, but inside the atmosphere was arid, hostile, suffocating. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead with the persistent drone of institutional indifference. Robert Williams sat with his legs sprawled, occupying as much space as physically possible. He tapped his Mont Blanc fountain pen, limited edition, $8,500, against the mahogany table in a rhythmic click-click-click that echoed like a ticking bomb. Each tap was deliberate, designed to irritate, to dominate the silence with his presence. Beside him sat Donald Thomas, a divorce attorney so notorious in the Hamptons that colleagues whispered his nickname, the Butcher. Men hired Donald when they wanted to destroy their wives financially and emerge spotless. His reputation was built on a foundation of shattered marriages and one-sided settlements that left women with nothing but their dignity, and sometimes not even that. Across the aisle sat Maggie. She wore a gray wool cardigan that had seen better seasons, shapeless and pilled at the elbows. The fabric hung loose on her frame as if she had shrunk inside it over the months of pretending. No makeup touched her face. No mascara to define her gray-green eyes. No lipstick to bring color to lips, pressed thin with tension she wasn't supposed to feel. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a severe, unassuming bun, secured with a plain elastic band that had cost 99 cents at a drugstore. She looked small, defeated, invisible. To the casual observer, she was the quintessential discarded wife, the woman who had supported her husband while he climbed the ladder only to be shoved off the moment he reached the roof. The courtroom artist in the back row had already sketched her with slumped shoulders and downcast eyes, the portrait of quiet surrender that would run in tomorrow's tabloids. Donald Thomas cleared his throat, a wet, self-satisfied sound that filled the room like a declaration of victory. "Let's wrap this up, shall we?" He slid a thick stack of documents across the polished table with the casual indifference of a man who had done this 1,000 times. The papers made a soft whisper as they glided over the wood, coming to rest directly in front of Maggie. "My client has a tea time at Liberty National at 3. He's being generous, Mrs. Williams." Maggie didn't flinch at the name. She simply looked at the papers, her eyes tracking across the first page with the kind of stillness that could be mistaken for incomprehension. "The settlement includes the Honda Civic, the Astoria apartment paid up for 6 months, and a lump sum of $50,000. Donald's voice dripped with condescension, each word designed to humiliate, to remind her of her place in the hierarchy he had constructed. "In exchange, you waive all rights to Williams Aerospace, the Tribeca penthouse, the Hamptons estate, and any future earnings derived from intellectual property developed during the marriage." He paused, letting the weight of what she was giving up settle over the room like a shroud. "You also acknowledge in writing that you had no involvement in the creation, development, or strategic direction of Williams Aerospace, that the company is solely the product of Mr. Williams's vision and expertise." Robert smirked, not even looking at her. His attention was fixed on his phone, his thumb scrolling with the practiced ease of someone for whom the present moment held no interest. Maggie knew exactly who he was texting: Jessica Davis, the 24-year-old PR intern who had been rebranding Robert's personal life for the last 8 months. The glossy photographs Maggie's private investigator had delivered 3 weeks ago flashed through her mind with photographic clarity. Robert and Jessica at Carbone, his hand resting on her thigh under the white tablecloth while he signed a $40,000 wine bill without blinking. Robert and Jessica in Miami Beach. his hand on her bare back as they walked into a private villa he had rented for $18,000 for 4 nights. Robert and Jessica in their bed. The bed Maggie had chosen, the Egyptian cotton sheets she had washed and pressed every Sunday for 10 years, folded with hospital corners the way his mother had taught her. Donald leaned forward, lowering his voice to a mock sympathetic whisper that carried perfectly across the silent courtroom, designed for maximum theatrical impact. "The judge is ready to sign off. Robert is doing you a favor, Maggie. Without a prenup, we could have dragged this out for years, drained whatever savings you think you have, and left you with debt collectors camping outside whatever studio apartment you managed to afford." He smiled, the expression of a shark who had tasted blood in the water and knew the feeding frenzy was about to begin. "Sign the papers, Mrs. Williams. Go find a nice librarian job. Disappear into whatever quiet life suits you. You were never cut out for this world anyway." The galas, the board meetings, the pressure, it was eating you alive. Everyone could see it. Maggie looked down at the document. The legalese blurred slightly, not from tears but from the sheer audacity of Clause 44B printed in 10-point Times New Roman, as if the smaller font could somehow diminish the insult embedded in the words. "The plaintiff, Margaret Wilson Williams, acknowledges she has no knowledge of nor contribution to the intellectual property, strategic development, or financial architecture of Williams Aerospace." It was insulting. It was cruel. It was a lie so brazen that Maggie almost admired the audacity it took to type it. Judge Stephen Taylor shifted in his seat, the leather creaking under his weight. His steel-gray hair caught the overhead lights as he looked over his spectacles at the scene unfolding before him. "Is there a problem, Mrs. Williams?" His voice was gentle, the only humane sound in the room. Robert finally looked up, his eyes cold and blue, the color of a winter sky that promised nothing but frost. They were devoid of the warmth she remembered from 12 years ago, when they were both eating instant ramen in a basement studio in Brooklyn, dreaming about building something that mattered, something that would outlast them both. "Just sign it, Maggie." His voice was flat, bored, as if he were asking her to pass the salt at dinner. "Don't make a scene. You know you're not built for a fight. You're soft." Soft. The word hung in the air between them like an accusation. Maggie repeated it, her voice barely a whisper, testing the weight of it on her tongue. "Exactly. Soft. You like baking cookies for the staff holiday party. You like organizing charity drives and writing thank-you notes on personalized stationery. You don't like litigation depositions, asset freezes, forensic accountants crawling through bank statements at 3 in the morning. Robert chuckled, a cold, ugly sound that started in his chest and died in his throat. Donald joined in a shark-like grin spreading across his face, revealing teeth that were too white, too perfect, the product of expensive cosmetic dentistry. "You're a good person, Maggie. Good people finish last in divorce court. So take the 50 grand, take the Honda, and go buy yourself some I don't know yarn. Knit yourself a new life. Maybe get a cat, 2 cats. Live in Queens and pretend this never happened." The courtroom fell silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, her fingers hovering over the keys, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. Maggie picked up the pen. Her hand didn't shake, not even a tremor. Judge Stephen Taylor leaned forward, his expression grave, his voice carrying the weight of 3 decades on the bench, witnessing human nature at its worst. "Mrs. Williams, do you understand the document you are signing? This is a complete severance of assets. You are walking away from what the state of New York would consider a substantial marital estate, estimated at over $1.2 billion in combined holdings." His frown deepened with each word, the lines around his mouth etching themselves deeper into his face. In 30 years of presiding over divorce proceedings, he had seen greed, cruelty, and injustice in every conceivable form. But this was something else. This was a public execution disguised as a legal proceeding, and he was being asked to be the executioner. "I understand, Your Honor." Maggie's voice was steady, clear, each syllable precisely articulated. "And you are satisfied with the settlement of $50,000, a 10-year-old vehicle, and 6 months of subsidized housing." The question carried within it an implicit plea. "Please say no. Please fight this. Please don't let him destroy you like this. I am satisfied that this document ends my marriage to Mr. Williams." Maggie's words were careful, deliberate, each one weighted with meaning that no one in the room could yet decipher. And that it legally separates our financial identities completely effective immediately upon filing. Robert snapped his fingers, the sound sharp and dismissive. Great, she gets it. Can we move this along? I have actual business to attend to. The board is waiting for my quarterly report, and I need to prep on the flight to Seattle. Maggie pressed the pen to the paper. The scratch of the nib against the expensive cotton fiber was the only sound in the courtroom, a whisper of finality that seemed to echo in the vaulted ceiling. She signed in smooth, confident cursive, each letter flowing into the next, with the practiced elegance of someone who had been taught penmanship by nuns at an exclusive Connecticut boarding school. Margaret R. Wilson, not Williams, her maiden name, the name she was born with, the name that carried weight Robert had never bothered to ask about, had never thought to investigate, had dismissed as irrelevant the one time she had mentioned her family over dinner in their 3rd year of marriage. She slid the papers back across the table without a word, the motion economical final. Robert snatched them up as if they were made of gold, barely glancing at the signature line. His eyes skimmed the page, looking for his own name, checking that everything was in order, that his victory was complete and legally binding. Done. He stood abruptly, buttoning his charcoal Tom Ford jacket with quick, practiced movements. God, that was exhausting. 2 hours of my life I'll never get back. He turned to Donald, already moving toward the door, already mentally checked out of the room, and the woman he was leaving behind. Wire the $50,000 to whatever account she gives you. Let's get out of here. Jessica is waiting at Le Bernardin and I'm starving. I want the tasting menu with the wine pairing. The good one, not the reserve list. We're celebrating. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't look back. He didn't offer a handshake or a final word of acknowledgement for the 10 years they had spent building a life together. He marched toward the heavy oak doors, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble floor, with the confidence of a man who believed he had just won the greatest victory of his life, who thought he had shed dead weight and emerged lighter, freer, ready to soar to heights his boring wife could never have reached. The doors swung shut behind him with a final booming thud that reverberated through the courtroom like the closing of a tomb. Maggie remained seated. Her posture hadn't changed. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, fingers interlaced with the calm precision of someone who had just completed a complex mathematical proof and was waiting for the professor to check the work. The silence stretched, broken only by the sound of Donald Thomas packing his briefcase with brisk, efficient movements. He hummed under his breath a tuneless melody that spoke of satisfaction, of another successful demolition. Mrs. Wilson. Judge Taylor's voice was soft, almost apologetic. He used the name she had just signed, acknowledging the choice she had made. You are free to go. The decree will be filed within the hour. If you need resources, counseling, legal aid, anything the court can provide, referrals. Maggie slowly reached into her oversized, worn-out tote bag, the kind of bag a thrift store shopper might carry, canvas faded from too many washings, a strap held together with safety pins. But what she pulled out was anything but thrift store. A sleek black iPad Pro in a leather case. A phone that was definitely not the cracked iPhone 6 she had been carrying in front of Robert for the past 6 months. The one with the shattered screen she had refused to replace because it still worked, didn't it? This phone was new. Top of the line. The screen flawless. She tapped it once. The motion was fluid, practiced, the gesture of someone who lived in technology, not someone who struggled with it. Her posture shifted instantly. The transformation was so complete, so immediate, that the court reporter actually gasped. The slump in Maggie's shoulders vanished as if someone had pulled a string running through her spine. Her chin lifted, the angle changing from defeated to defiant. The soft, defeated housewife was gone, replaced by something entirely different, something sharp, cold, and utterly in control. The mousy woman in the gray cardigan had disappeared. In her place sat someone else entirely. Donald Thomas looked up from his briefcase, his hands freezing mid-motion. His expression shifted from smug satisfaction to confusion, then to the first flicker of something that might have been alarm. "Thank you, Your Honor." Maggie's tone was crisp, authoritative. the voice of someone who spent her days issuing directives that moved millions of dollars with a single phone call. I just needed to wait until the timestamp on the divorce decree was official. She dialed a number. The line picked up on the first ring, as if someone had been waiting phone in hand for this exact moment. "It's done." Her voice carried the weight of a boardroom, not a courtroom. Each word was measured precise, conveying information with maximum efficiency. He signed the waiver of interest in my external assets to protect his own company. Yes, trigger the clause. Initiate the conversion. And tell the board of directors at Williams Aerospace I'll be leading the emergency meeting tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. sharp. I want the full forensic audit on the table. Every transaction, every transfer, every fraudulent line item. No exceptions. Judge Taylor's mouth opened slightly, his eyes widening behind his spectacles. Donald Thomas dropped the folder he was holding. It hit the floor with a slap, papers scattering across the marble in a cascade of legal documents that suddenly meant nothing. "I'm sorry." The judge's voice cracked slightly, the professional veneer fracturing under the weight of his confusion. "Did you just say you're leading the board meeting?" Maggie stood up, smoothing her gray skirt with the kind of casual grace that suddenly made it look intentional, not frumpy, but strategic. Camouflage. The shapeless cardigan that had made her look like someone's grandmother now seemed like the costume of a master spy, someone who had hidden in plain sight while the enemy celebrated his victory. She turned back, and for the first time since entering the courtroom 3 hours ago, she smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was not the smile of someone who had just survived a traumatic experience and was trying to find the bright side. It was the smile of a chess player who had just said checkmate. It was the smile of someone who had been 3 moves ahead the entire game. "Robert thought he was protecting his company from me, Your Honor." Her voice was calm, clinical, the tone of a surgeon explaining a procedure to medical students. "He didn't realize that Williams Aerospace has been technically insolvent for 3 years. The judge leaned forward, his skepticism warring with genuine confusion. His hand gripped the edge of the bench as if he needed something solid to hold on to. "Insolvent Williams Aerospace stock is trading at $193 per share as of this morning. The company is valued at, I read the financial disclosures myself when reviewing the asset division, $1.2 billion. $1.2 billion on paper," Maggie interrupted smoothly, her tone that of a professor correcting a student's miscalculation. "But the operational debt is $1.8 billion. The only reason Williams Aerospace is still functioning, the only reason there are paychecks clearing for 3,000 employees every 2 weeks is because it's being funded by a private equity firm called Summit Capital." She slung her bag over her shoulder. The worn canvas suddenly looked less like poverty and more like a billionaire traveling incognito, someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone, who moved through the world on her own terms. Donald Thomas was staring at her as if she had grown a second head. His mouth worked soundlessly, his brain trying to process information that didn't fit any schema he had constructed for this case. "And," Maggie paused, letting the moment stretch, savoring it the way Robert had savored his smirk when he thought he'd won. Her eyes locked onto Judge Taylor's, holding his gaze with the unflinching directness of someone who had nothing left to hide. "I am Summit Capital." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop the room holding its breath. Donald Thomas's briefcase slipped from his hands and hit the floor with a loud crack that echoed through the vaulted space. He stared at Maggie as if she had just sprouted wings and announced she was the angel of death come to collect debts long overdue. Stop and think about this for a second. What nobody in that courtroom knew, not Robert's shark lawyer, not the judge, not even Robert himself, was that the woman they'd all pitied for the last hour had spent 3 years quietly saving the man who was about to destroy her. Let that sink in. To understand how Margaret Wilson had become invisible, you had to go back to the beginning, to 2013, to a cramped basement studio in Park Slope, Brooklyn, where the radiator clanked all night like a prisoner rattling chains and the neighbor's dog barked at 6 a.m. every single morning with the regularity of an alarm clock set by someone who hated you. Robert Williams had been 29 years old, brilliant, but disorganized, a mechanical engineer with a head full of revolutionary ideas and a bank account hovering at -$42. The bank had sent him 3 overdraft notices in 1 month. He worked at Lockheed Martin's satellite division during the day, spent his nights sketching propulsion engine designs on graph paper at the kitchen table, and dreamed about building something that would change the world, that would make his name synonymous with innovation, the way Musk and Bezos had become shorthand for ambition. Margaret Wilson had been 25, a quiet math prodigy who had graduated MIT at 19 with dual degrees in applied mathematics and actuarial science. Perfect scores. Thesis published. Job offers from every major consulting firm in the country, all of which she had turned down to work as a risk analyst at Marsh & McLennan, calculating probabilities for corporate insurance policies. She was brilliant, methodical, and completely uninterested in being noticed. She wore the same rotation of 5 outfits, ate lunch at her desk every day, and left the office at exactly 5:30, never staying late to network or politic for promotions she didn't want. They met at a TED Talk on renewable energy at the Brooklyn Public Library on a Tuesday evening in September, when the air still held the last warmth of summer. Robert had been loud, charismatic, sketching ideas on napkins and talking a mile a minute about ion propulsion and reusable rockets to anyone who would listen. His energy filled the room, drawing people to him like moths to a flame. Maggie had been sitting in the back row, silent, taking notes in a leather-bound notebook with a fountain pen she had inherited from her grandfather. Her handwriting was precise, each letter perfectly formed. After the talk, Robert had bounded up to her with the confidence of someone who had never been rejected, who assumed the world would arrange itself to accommodate his enthusiasm. "You were taking notes the whole time. Did I say something interesting? Or are you just really bored and this is how you stay awake?" Maggie had looked up, her gray-green eyes calm and assessing, evaluating him with the same analytical precision she applied to risk models and probability distributions. "You said 17 things. 14 were interesting. 3 were mathematically impossible given current material science limitations." Robert had laughed, genuinely. Laughed the kind of surprised delight that came from meeting someone who could match him intellectually and wasn't afraid to say so. "Okay, I need to buy you coffee and find out which 3. I'm Robert Williams, aerospace engineer, dreamer, future CEO of something that doesn't exist yet. Margaret Wilson, actuary. I calculate the probability of things going wrong so insurance companies know how much to charge." That sounds depressing. It's honest. Most things go wrong eventually. The only question is when and how much it will cost. That coffee turned into 6 hours at a diner on Flatbush Avenue, where they were the last customers, and the waitress had to ask them 3 times to leave so she could close. 6 hours turned into weekly meetings at the same diner. Always the corner booth, always black coffee for him, and Earl Grey tea for her. Weekly meetings turned into a partnership that felt inevitable, as if the universe had been steering them toward each other all along. Robert was the dreamer, the salesman, the face that could charm investors and engineers alike. Maggie was the architect, the strategist, the one who turned his wild sketches into actual engineering blueprints, financial models that actually balanced, and FAA compliance documents that could survive regulatory scrutiny. In 2014, they founded Williams Aerospace in that same basement studio. Robert was CEO. Maggie was everything else. CFO, COO, head of logistics compliance officer. She built the financial models that secured their first angel investment, $200,000 from a tech entrepreneur who believed in Robert's vision but didn't know Maggie existed. She wrote the algorithms that optimized their fuel efficiency calculations, reducing costs by 30%, and making their proposals competitive with companies that had $100 million R&D budgets. She negotiated the lease on their first warehouse in Newark, talking the landlord down from $8,000 a month to $5,500 by pointing out the building code violations he hadn't disclosed and offering to handle the repairs herself if he covered materials. And Robert was on magazine covers. Robert gave TED Talks to audiences of thousands. Robert shook hands with senators and billionaires and made them believe they were witnessing the birth of the next SpaceX. Maggie stayed in the background. She preferred it that way. She didn't need the spotlight. She didn't need her name in Forbes or invitations to Davos. She just needed to build something that mattered, something that would still be orbiting Earth long after both of them were gone. They got married in 2015 at City Hall on a Tuesday afternoon between meetings. No guests, no ceremony, just a judge who processed them in 7 minutes and handed them a certificate that made it legal. Pizza afterward in Little Italy at a place where the owner knew Robert and gave them free tiramisu to celebrate. It was perfect. For a while. The night everything broke, Maggie had been in her home office in their newly purchased Tribeca loft. 3,200 square feet, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River, the kind of place that screamed, "We made it? We're real now, we're not pretending anymore." The loft had cost $4.2 million. They had closed escrow 3 weeks earlier. The walls still smelled of fresh paint. She had been reviewing the quarterly financials, her laptop screen casting a blue glow across her face in the darkened office. The numbers were bad. Not catastrophic yet, but trending in a direction that made her stomach clench. Revenue down 18%. Operating costs up 23%. The burn rate was unsustainable. She heard the door slam. The sound of breaking glass, Robert throwing his phone against the wall. Then footsteps. Heavy, unsteady, the gait of someone who had been drinking and didn't care who knew. When he appeared in the doorway, his tie was loose, hanging around his neck like a noose he'd tried to escape. His shirt was untucked, stained with something dark, wine maybe, or whiskey. His eyes were red-rimmed, the whites shot through with broken capillaries. He was drunk. Not tipsy, not pleasantly buzzed. Drunk in the way that made words slur and balance fail. "It's over." His voice was thick, each word fighting through the alcohol to reach the air. "It's all over, Maggie. I lost it. I lost everything we built." Maggie stood up alarmed, her chair rolling back and hitting the wall, her heart rate spiked, adrenaline flooding her system. "What are you talking about? What happened?" "The engine. The X7 ion propulsion engine. The one we've been developing for 2 years. The one every investor is counting on. It failed the NASA safety certification." His voice cracked, emotion breaking through. Catastrophic structural failure at 14,000 feet during the test flight at White Sands. The whole thing just disintegrated. They have footage. It's already leaked to the press. Bloomberg ran it at 5. The stock dropped 38% in 4 hours. He leaned against the doorframe, needing it to stay upright. "The banks are calling in the loans. We're 3 days from bankruptcy. 3 days, Maggie. Everything we built, the warehouse, the contracts, the team, all of it gone. Just gone." Maggie walked over to him, her mind already racing through scenarios, calculating options, running probability distributions on survival strategies. She took his hands, trying to ground him, to pull him back from the edge. "Okay, we'll fix it. We've faced problems before. We'll restructure the debt, renegotiate with the banks. Maybe pivot to the commercial satellite deployment we've been developing as a backup. We have options. We always have options." "There is no we." Robert yanked his hands away with such force that she stumbled backward. He shoved her both hands on her shoulders, pushing hard enough that she crashed into the desk behind her. Pain shot through her hip where it connected with the sharp corner. He loomed over her, his face twisted with rage and desperation, with the ugly terror of a man watching his entire identity crumble. "You don't understand business, Maggie. You sit in this office playing with spreadsheets and think you're contributing, but you're not. You're just doing bookkeeping while I'm out there putting my face on the line, my reputation. You don't know what it's like when Bloomberg calls you a failure, when your investors tell you you're finished, when your name becomes a punchline." His breath smelled like bourbon and bile. "Robert, I built half of those financial models. I can help us restructure. I know people at Morgan Stanley who specialize in distressed asset." "You cook dinner and pay the electric bill." He was shouting now, spittle flying, his face red with alcohol and fury. "That's what you do. You handle the boring shit so I can focus on the real work. I need a miracle, Maggie. I need Elon Musk to buy us out, or the federal government to write a blank check. I don't need you to hug me and tell me it's going to be okay when you have no fucking idea what okay even looks like anymore." He turned and walked out, slamming the bedroom door behind him, hard enough that a framed photo fell off the wall in the hallway. Glass shattered, the sound crystalline and final. Maggie stood in the silent office, her hands trembling, not from fear, from something else, something colder. That night broke something in Maggie. But she didn't leave. She didn't cry. She didn't call her father or her college roommate or the therapist she'd seen twice after her mother died. She went to work. The next morning, while Robert was passed out in the bedroom, one arm thrown over his face to block the sunlight streaming through windows he'd forgotten to cover, Maggie made 3 phone calls. The first was to her father. "Dad, I need access to the Wilson Family Trust." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Richard Wilson was 71 years old, the patriarch of a banking family that had been quietly managing fortunes since 1847. The Wilsons didn't make headlines. They didn't need to. Old money never does. It sits in trust funds and foundation boards and university endowments, compounding, silently growing like coral reefs in the deep ocean where light doesn't reach. "Margaret." Her father's voice was careful, measured the tone of someone choosing words with the precision of a jeweler cutting diamonds. "You haven't touched that trust since your mother passed. Are you sure?" "I'm sure." "How much do you need?" $200 million. Another pause, longer this time. She could hear him breathing. Could imagine him standing in his study in the Connecticut house where she'd grown up, looking out at Long Island Sound, calculating risk, the way she did, weighing probability against necessity. "That's a significant sum. May I ask what this is for?" "It's for Robert's company. He's in trouble. I'm going to fix it." "And does Robert know you're calling me?" Maggie looked at the closed bedroom door, at the man passed out behind it who thought he knew everything about her, who had never asked about her family beyond the superficial dinner party questions. "No. And he won't. I need you to set up a shell company, domiciled in Delaware for tax purposes. Funding routed through separate accounts layered through 3 intermediaries minimum. I want it completely untraceable to me or the Wilson name. No paper trail that leads back to Connecticut." Her father was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried something that might have been pride. "You're your mother's daughter. She would have done the same thing." His voice softened. "I'll have the papers ready by Thursday. What are you calling it?" Maggie looked out the window at the rising sun over Manhattan, the city glowing gold and merciless, beautiful and brutal in the morning light. Summit Capital. Within 2 weeks, Summit Capital, a mysterious private equity firm with no public face, no website, and no listed partners, approached Williams Aerospace with an offer that seemed too good to be true. They would buy the company's toxic debt from the banks at face value, stopping the foreclosure clock. They would inject $200 million in emergency capital to fund operations and R&D for the next 18 months. Oh, they would ask for no board seats, no operational control, no creative input. In exchange, they would take a 51% equity stake convertible to voting shares if the stock price ever dropped below $180 per share for more than 30 consecutive trading days. The conversion clause was buried in Section 7, Paragraph 14 of a 78-page contract written in the densest legal language Maggie could construct. She had spent 3 days with Kenneth Lee, the most expensive corporate attorney in New York, a man who charged $950 per hour and was worth every penny, making sure the language was airtight, unambiguous, and completely legal. Robert, desperate and drowning, signed without reading past page 3. He didn't ask who Summit Capital was. He didn't question why they were offering such generous terms. He didn't wonder why a private equity firm would invest in a company that had just failed its most important product test. He just cashed the checks. Within 6 months, Williams Aerospace had recovered. The stock climbed back to $190. Robert was hailed in the business press as a genius who had saved his company from the brink through sheer force of will and his extensive network in the aerospace industry. Forbes ran a cover story, "The Comeback Kid," how Robert Williams turned disaster into opportunity. In the article, he explained his philosophy: when you're facing annihilation, you can't be emotional. You have to be ruthless. You have to cut the dead weight, make the hard decisions, and bet everything on your vision. That's what separates the winners from the casualties. He never mentioned Maggie, not once, not even when the reporter asked about his support system. "I'm lucky to have people who believe in me," he'd said, "but at the end of the day you're alone in the arena. Success or failure, that's on you." And Maggie? Maggie went back to the shadows. She attended the company holiday parties, standing in the background while Robert worked the room. She smiled in the photographs that ran in the business section, always slightly out of focus, always at the edge of the frame. She kept the books balanced and the logistics running and the compliance documentation filed on time, so the company never missed a regulatory deadline. And she watched. She watched him take credit for the financial restructuring she had designed. She watched him explain the new vendor agreements she had negotiated. She watched him present the optimized fuel efficiency algorithms she had written as if they had sprung fully formed from his own brilliant mind. She watched and she learned. She learned that loyalty meant nothing to him. That partnership was a word he used to describe transactions, not relationships. That when he said we, he meant I, and when he said team effort, he meant my achievement. And 6 months ago, everything had finally crystallized into perfect clarity. Maggie came home early from the annual St. Jude's Children's Hospital charity gala. She had a migraine, the kind that made the world tilt and blur at the edges, that turned light into knives and sound into hammers. She had told Robert she was taking an Uber home, that she was sorry to leave early, but she couldn't see straight. He had barely looked up from his conversation with a SpaceX executive, a man who could potentially open doors to contracts worth hundreds of millions. "Sure, babe, feel better. Take some aspirin." She let herself into the Tribeca loft at 9:47 p.m. The lights were off. Strange. Robert had said he was staying late at the gala working the room, but his Tesla was parked in their assigned spot in the garage. Maggie walked into the master bedroom to get aspirin from the ensuite bathroom. That's when she saw it. On her vanity. Next to her jewelry box. Right where she would see it when she came in. A diamond earring. Tiffany's. Platinum setting. 2 carats cushion cut. The price tag for the pair would have been somewhere around $47,000. It wasn't hers. Maggie picked it up slowly. The metal was still warm, as if it had just been removed from someone's ear. She held it up to the light, watching it catch the glow from the hallway, refracting into rainbows that danced across the ceiling. She walked to the closet, opened the door. A woman's dress hung on the hook inside, black sequined size 2 designer label she didn't recognize. Definitely not hers. The bathroom door was closed. She could hear the shower running, could see steam seeping out from under the door like fog rolling in from the ocean. Maggie didn't knock. She didn't scream. She simply stood there holding the earrings, staring at the closed door. Her mind working through the mathematics of betrayal, calculating probabilities and outcomes with the same precision she had once used to assess corporate risk. The shower turned off. 30 seconds later, the door opened. Jessica Davis stepped out wrapped in Maggie's bathrobe, the monogrammed white Egyptian cotton robe Maggie's mother had given her before she died, before the cancer had taken her in 6 brutal months that had left Maggie an orphan at 32. Jessica froze when she saw Maggie. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Her face cycled through expressions: shock, fear, defiance, then a strange kind of resignation, as if she'd been expecting this moment and was almost relieved it had finally arrived. Mrs. Williams, I can explain, this isn't—" Maggie held up the earring between thumb and forefinger, the diamond catching the light. "You left this." Jessica's hand flew to her bare earlobe, confirming what Maggie already knew. "I'm so sorry. This isn't what it looks like. Robert said you wouldn't be home until midnight. He went to get champagne from the corner store. He'll be back in 5 minutes. Please, Where is he?" Jessica's voice was small now, all the bravado of youth and beauty stripped away by the reality of being caught. "He went to get champagne from the corner store on Greenwich. He'll be back in—" Maggie set the earring down on the vanity with a soft click that seemed to echo in the silence. She walked past Jessica without another word, her shoulder not even brushing the younger woman's as she moved through the space that used to be hers. She went to the guest bedroom and locked the door. She didn't cry. She opened her laptop and typed 6 words into Google, her fingers moving with mechanical precision. Best private investigator, New York, discreet. The private investigator's name was Michelle Martin, a former NYPD detective who now ran a boutique firm specializing in domestic intelligence. Her office occupied the third floor of a nondescript building in Midtown, accessed through a lobby that smelled of industrial cleaner and old carpet. The frosted glass door bore no name, just a suite number in small brass numerals. Michelle had been direct during their first meeting, her handshake firm, her eyes assessing Maggie with the practiced evaluation of someone who had seen every variation of human deception. "I don't do confrontations. I don't testify in court unless subpoenaed. I gather information. What you do with it is your business." "I understand." "What do you need?" "Everything. Everywhere he goes. Everyone he talks to. How long it's been happening. If there are others." Michelle studied her for a long moment, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp, cataloging details: the wedding ring Maggie still wore, the expensive handbag with the fraying strap, the way she sat with perfect posture that spoke of boarding school training. "You seem calm." "I am. Most people aren't. Most people come in here crying or screaming or breaking things. They want revenge fantasies, want me to tell them I can ruin the other person's life. I'm not most people." Michelle smiled slightly, a ghost of an expression that disappeared as quickly as it arrived. "No, I don't think you are." The photos came back within a week, delivered in a manila envelope thick enough to require extra postage. 53 pages. Metadata intact on every image, timestamps, GPS coordinates, even credit card receipts Michelle had obtained through methods Maggie didn't ask about and didn't want to know. Photo 1, Robert and Jessica at Carbone on September 14th. His hand on her thigh under the white tablecloth fingers splayed possessively. The sommelier presenting a bottle of wine in the background, the label clear enough to identify Chateau Petrus Vintage that would have cost $3,000. Photo 2, Robert and Jessica in Miami Beach on September 22nd, private villa with infinity pool overlooking the ocean. His American Express paid for it $18,000 for 4 nights. The receipt showed room service charges for champagne and strawberries, couples massage, private chef dinner for 2. Photo 3, Robert and Jessica at the Williams Aerospace holiday party on December 10th. His hand on the small of her back steering her away from the group where Maggie stood talking to the head of HR. Jessica's dress was red backless, the kind that made men turn their heads. Maggie's dress in the same photo was navy conservative forgettable. But it was the text messages that made Maggie's decision final, that transformed anger into strategy and hurt into calculation. Michelle had cloned Robert's phone remotely using spyware that was technically illegal but functionally undetectable. The messages were damning, each one a small knife inserted carefully between ribs. Robert to Jessica. October 3rd. "She's like a piece of old furniture. Useful when you need it, but embarrassing to show to guests. I'm divorcing her as soon as the stock hits 200. My lawyer says we can be done in 6 weeks. Jessica to Robert. October 5th. "What if she fights you for the company?" Robert to Jessica. "She won't. She doesn't understand corporate law, and even if she tried, I have Donald Thomas on retainer. He'll bury her so deep she'll need archaeology to find daylight." Maggie read the messages 3 times. Her face expressionless, her breathing controlled. Then she closed the folder, opened a new document, and began typing. Strategic plan, divorce, and asset recovery. She worked through the night, the sky outside her window shifting from black to gray to the pale gold of dawn. By the time Robert woke up hungover and irritable, demanding coffee and Advil, Maggie had outlined every step of a plan that would take 6 months to execute and would destroy him so completely that he would spend years trying to understand what had happened. For the next 6 months, Maggie became a ghost in her own life, a carefully constructed performance of gradual decline. She stopped wearing makeup. The expensive foundations and serums she had once applied with precision went unused, gathering dust on the bathroom counter. Her skin looked tired without them, the fine lines around her eyes more visible, the dark circles pronounced. She bought cardigans from Target instead of Saks, shapeless, pilled at the elbows, the kind of clothes that announced defeat. She let her hair grow out without styling it, pulling it back in a severe bun, secured with drugstore elastic bands. She started driving the old Honda Civic they kept in storage, the one with rust spots on the fenders and a crack in the windshield, instead of her Audi that Robert had given her for their 5th anniversary. At company events, she made herself small. When Robert talked about business, she smiled vaguely and contributed comments designed to sound supportive but ignorant. "That sounds complicated. I'm sure you know best." "I don't really understand all the technical details, but it's wonderful that you're so passionate about it. You're so much better at the strategy than I could ever be." She watched his eyes glaze over with contempt every time she spoke, watched him turn away to find more interesting conversation with people who could match his intellectual energy. Good. Perfect. Exactly what she needed. She asked Donald Thomas, who Robert had introduced as the best divorce attorney in New York, just in case we ever need him. Innocent questions about prenuptial agreements at a Hamptons cocktail party in July. The party was at a beachfront estate, white tents on manicured lawns, waiters in white jackets circulating with champagne and canapes that cost more per bite than most people spent on entire meals. "We never signed one. Is that bad?" Donald had patted her hand condescendingly, the gesture of a man reassuring a child about monsters under the bed. "Don't worry your pretty little head about it, Mrs. Williams. If it ever came to that, which it won't, I'm sure the courts would favor the primary earner. Robert built that company. You just supported him." "Oh, that makes sense." Donald had walked away smiling, convinced she was an idiot already calculating his fees for the inevitable divorce he could see coming. He had probably gone home that night and told his wife about the pathetic woman married to the aerospace genius, how she didn't even understand basic legal concepts. Perfect. She let Robert believe she was falling apart. Let him think the marriage was suffocating her, that she was too weak to fight, too soft to survive in the world he inhabited. And all the while she was preparing, reading case law on debt-to-equity conversions, consulting with Kenneth Lee about the precise language needed to make the Summit Capital contract airtight, building a forensic case against Robert's financial misconduct with the methodical patience of someone constructing a cathedral one stone at a time. The final piece fell into place on a Tuesday in March when the stock hit $197 per share. Williams Aerospace had been climbing steadily for months, fueled by rumors of a major NASA contract that Robert had started himself, despite the contract not actually existing yet. He was pumping the stock, manipulating market sentiment, committing securities fraud with the casual confidence of someone who thought he was untouchable. Robert came home that night with a bottle of Dom Perignon and a grin that made Maggie's stomach turn, that made her want to throw something at his head just to wipe the smug satisfaction off his face. 200 by Friday. I can feel it. The momentum is there. And once we hit 200, I'm filing. Maggie looked up from the book she was pretending to read, her expression carefully neutral. "Filing what?" "The divorce papers, babe. We had a good run, but let's be honest, you're not built for this world. The pressure, the scrutiny, the constant performance. You're a good person, Maggie. You deserve someone simpler, someone who wants to garden and bake cookies and live in the suburbs with a white picket fence and a golden retriever." He poured 2 glasses, handed her one with the casual entitlement of someone who expected gratitude for his generosity in destroying her life. "I've already talked to Donald. He says we can have this wrapped up in 6 weeks. You'll get a fair settlement, 50 grand the Civic, maybe 6 months' rent, somewhere reasonable. I keep the company, obviously. You agree you had no involvement in the intellectual property. Clean break, no drama. We both move on." He raised his glass, the champagne catching the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows. "To new beginnings." Maggie raised hers, clinked it against his with a sound like a small bell tolling. "To new beginnings." That night, after Robert passed out in the bedroom, one arm flung across the space where she used to sleep, Maggie made another call to Michelle. "It's time. I need you to leak the story about the affair to Page 6. Make sure the photo of them in Miami is included. The one with the villa in the background. I want it published Friday morning, 7 a.m. Eastern. Not a minute earlier, not a minute later. That'll tank the stock. You understand that?" "I know." "You're sure?" "Positive. The stock needs to drop below 180 for 30 consecutive days to trigger the Summit conversion clause. This will start the clock, and once the clock starts, Robert can't stop it. The contract language is ironclad." Michelle's voice carried a note of professional admiration mixed with something that might have been concern. "And Robert doesn't know you're behind Summit. He has no idea. He never asked. He just assumed it was exactly what it claimed to be, a mysterious private equity firm with money to burn and no interest in operational control." There was a pause. Then Michelle laughed, a short, sharp bark of sound that was more acknowledgement than amusement. "You're scary, Mrs. Williams. Ms. Wilson. After Friday, I'm done being Mrs. Williams." The page 6 headline went viral within an hour of publication. Maggie was in her home office when it dropped, watching the real-time analytics on her laptop, tracking the spread across social media like an epidemiologist monitoring a disease outbreak. Rocket Man's flameout. Williams Aerospace CEO caught in Miami. Love nest with intern half his age. The photo was perfect. Robert and Jessica on a private beach, his hand tangled in her hair, kissing her like the world was ending. The photographer had caught them at sunset, the golden light making everything look cinematic, romantic, like a scene from a movie about beautiful people making terrible decisions. By 9:30 a.m., Williams Aerospace stock had dropped 11%. By noon, it was down 19%. By market close, it had plummeted to $168 per share, erasing $700 million in market capitalization in a single day. Robert's phone exploded with calls. Board members demanding explanations, investors threatening lawsuits, his publicist leaving frantic voicemails about damage control, his mother calling to ask if the photo was real and what had he been thinking. He came home that night looking like he'd aged 10 years. The boyish charm that had carried him through life had evaporated, leaving behind something haggard and desperate. Maggie was in the living room, sitting on the couch with a book she wasn't reading, waiting. "Did you see?" His voice was hollow, scraped raw. "See what?" "The article. About Jessica. Someone leaked a photo from September. We were in Miami for a conference. We were..." Maggie looked up from her book, her expression carefully composed into something resembling mild concern. "Oh, yes. I saw." Robert stared at her, his eyes searching for rage, for tears, for any reaction that would give him something to push against. "I'm sorry. It was a mistake. A stupid, meaningless mistake. She doesn't mean anything. It was just the pressure, the stress I needed. Okay." The single word landed like a stone in still water. "Okay." Robert's frown deepened, confusion replacing the defensive posture he'd prepared. "That's it. You're not going to yell, throw things, tell me I'm a piece of shit. What would that accomplish? You're fine with this." "I'm tired, Robert." Maggie closed her book with deliberate care, marking her place with the receipt she'd been using as a bookmark. "I'm tired of pretending this marriage is something it's not. If you want a divorce, file for one. I won't fight you." Robert blinked. He had expected battle. He had prepared for war. He had armed himself with justifications and counter-arguments and the righteous indignation of a man caught doing exactly what he'd been accused of. He hadn't expected surrender. "You mean that..." "I mean it." A slow smile spread across his face, relief flooding his features like sunrise breaking over a landscape that had been dark too long. Okay, I'll have Donald draw up the papers. We'll make this easy, painless. You'll be taken care of. I promise. Make it fast. I'd like to move on with my life." Donald Thomas filed the divorce petition on Monday, March 18th. He hand-delivered the papers to Maggie at the Tribeca loft, while Robert was at the office dealing with the fallout from the scandal, conducting damage control meetings with the board and the PR team. "Mrs. Williams, I'm sorry it's come to this. Truly." Maggie looked at him standing in her doorway, his expensive suit and his expensive briefcase and his expensive smugness, and felt nothing but cold calculation. "Are you? Divorce is always hard, but I want you to know that Robert is being extraordinarily generous. The settlement we're proposing is far more than you'd get if this went to trial, and we had to bring in forensic accountants to determine actual contribution versus emotional support." He opened his briefcase with a flourish, pulling out documents with the practiced efficiency of a magician revealing his trick. $50,000. The Honda Civic. 6 months' rent paid on an apartment of your choosing within reason, of course. Astoria would be appropriate. Maybe Sunnyside. Somewhere with reasonable cost of living. And Robert keeps everything else. Well, yes, Williams Aerospace is his creation. You were a supportive spouse, certainly, but the intellectual property, the business relationships, the brand recognition, that's all Robert. The courts recognize the difference between supporting a venture and creating one. I see. Do you have a lawyer, Mrs. Williams? No. Donald's smile widened, satisfaction radiating from him like heat from asphalt in summer. I'd be happy to recommend someone, pro bono even, just to make sure you understand what you're signing. I know a few attorneys who do good work for people in your situation. That won't be necessary. Are you sure this is a significant financial decision? You're walking away from potential claims on a billion-dollar enterprise. I'm sure. Donald studied her for a moment, seeing exactly what she wanted him to see, a defeated housewife in a cardigan ready to slink away quietly into whatever small life awaited women who failed to hold their husband's interest. Excellent. Then we'll see you in court on April 2nd. Judge Stephen Taylor. Courtroom 302. Should be very straightforward. Bring your identification and banking information for the wire transfer. After he left, Maggie walked to her office and made a call to Kenneth Lee. Her voice steady, professional, the tone of someone finalizing a complex business transaction. Kenneth, it's Margaret Wilson. Ms. Wilson, I've been waiting for your call. His voice was smooth, cultured, expensive in the way that 3 decades of Ivy League education and Supreme Court clerkships made voices expensive. I assume the timeline is accelerating. The divorce hearing is April 2nd. I need you there but not visible. Sit in the back. Don't identify yourself unless I give the signal. And the signal is, I'll say I am Summit Capital. Kenneth chuckled, a sound like expensive whiskey being poured into crystal. This is going to be memorable. The legal community will be teaching this case for decades. One more thing. I need the debt conversion paperwork ready to file the moment the divorce decree is stamped, not a minute later. The instant the separation is legal, Summit exercises its rights under Section 7, Paragraph 14. Already prepared, the instant he signs that waiver acknowledging separation of external assets. Summit Capital will own 65% of Williams Aerospace's voting shares. He'll walk out of that courtroom thinking he won and be bankrupt by lunch. Perfect. The night before the hearing, Maggie stood in front of her bathroom mirror studying the woman she had been pretending to be for 6 months. Shapeless cardigans, no makeup, flat shoes, a ghost, a placeholder, someone designed to be forgotten. Tomorrow the ghost would disappear. She picked up her phone and called Dominique, the stylist she hadn't used since the affair began, the one who had shaped her image for company events and charity galas. Dominique, it's Margaret Wilson. I need an appointment. Tonight. The voice on the other end was warm, concerned, the professional intimacy of someone who had spent hours making another person beautiful. Margaret, my God, where have you been? I've missed you. Robert's assistant kept canceling your appointments. I thought maybe, are you okay? I've been busy. Can you fit me in? For you always? What are we doing? Maggie looked at her reflection. The mousy hair, the tired eyes, the woman who had made herself small enough to slip through the cracks of her husband's attention. We're going to war. 3 hours later, Maggie's transformation was complete. Her hair was now a sharp, asymmetrical bob liquid gold razor cut with precision that cost $450 and was worth every penny. The style was severe, unforgiving, designed to command attention rather than deflect it. Her face carried minimal makeup but expertly applied. Defined brows that framed her eyes like architecture, subtle contour that sharpened her cheekbones into blades, a red lip the color of fresh blood. Matte finish, the kind that said, "Don't test me." She stood in her closet looking at the section she hadn't touched in months. Designer suits, Louboutin heels, Hermes scarves, the wardrobe of someone who belonged in boardrooms and corner offices. She pulled out a tailored white Armani pantsuit, sharp shoulders, nipped waist-flared legs. The fabric was wool and silk blend, structured enough to hold its shape, but fluid enough to move like water. It fit like armor, like a second skin designed for battle. She paired it with black Louboutin stilettos that added 4 inches to her height and made her footsteps sound like pronouncements. A black Birkin bag completed the ensemble, 35-centimeter Togo leather, worth more than most people's cars. She looked in the full-length mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Not soft, not invisible, powerful. Maggie couldn't sleep. She lay in the guest bedroom where she'd been sleeping for months, staring at the ceiling, running through the plan one more time with the obsessive precision of a general reviewing battle strategy. Step 1. Let Robert sign the divorce decree with the asset waiver that acknowledged complete separation of marital and external holdings. Step 2. Trigger the summit. Capital debt conversion the moment the decree was filed with the court clerk. Step 3. Call the emergency board meeting before Robert even left the courthouse. Step 4. Present the forensic audit showing systematic embezzlement and securities fraud. Step 5. Terminate him for cause, voiding all equity compensation and severance. Step 6. Hand the complete evidence package to the FBI. It was elegant. It was ruthless. It was justice. But there was a small part of her, the part that remembered Brooklyn and ramen and late nights sketching rocket designs on graph paper, that wondered if she was going too far, if destroying him completely was necessary, or if it was just revenge dressed up in the language of corporate governance. Then she remembered his text message. "She's like a piece of old furniture." She remembered him shoving her against the desk. "You don't understand business." She remembered Jessica in her mother's bathrobe, the one piece of her mother she had left besides photographs and a strand of pearls. The doubt evaporated like morning fog under direct sunlight. Maggie got out of bed, walked to her office, and pulled out the folder Michelle had given her 6 months ago. She flipped to the last page to a text message sent from Robert to Jessica 3 weeks ago, after the divorce papers had been filed, but before the hearing date was set. Robert to Jessica. "Once the divorce is final, we're going to Santa Barbara for 2 weeks. I'm going to fuck you on a yacht and forget Maggie ever existed. New life, new woman, new everything. The past is dead." Maggie closed the folder with a snap that sounded like a bone breaking. Tomorrow, Robert Williams would learn a lesson he should have learned a long time ago. Never underestimate the quiet ones. April 3rd arrived with the kind of clear morning that made New York look like the postcard version of itself. Blue sky, crisp air, the city gleaming with possibility. Robert Williams woke up in the Plaza Athénée Central Park suite, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the park like a painting. He stretched across Egyptian cotton sheets and hit warm, naked skin. Jessica stirred, mumbling something about room service and wanting Belgian waffles with the fancy berries. Robert climbed out of bed and walked to the window, completely naked, completely confident. He looked out over the park, the joggers, the horse-drawn carriages, the city that belonged to winners like him. He felt lighter. Specifically, he felt about 120 pounds lighter, the exact weight of Margaret Wilson Williams, the anchor he had finally cut loose. For years he had convinced himself she was dragging him down into mediocrity with her budget spreadsheets and her practical advice and her quiet presence that somehow made him feel smaller, less impressive, like he was performing for an audience that wasn't sufficiently impressed. Now he was free, and rich, and about to be richer. He checked his phone. 17 missed calls from Brian Thompson, his personal assistant. Robert ignored them. Brian was always panicking about something. Probably just logistics for today's quarterly board meeting where Robert planned to unveil his vision for luxury space tourism. Flashy, expensive, completely impractical, but guaranteed to get him on magazine covers. He dressed in his best suit, charcoal Tom Ford three-piece that had cost $8,000 and made him look like he owned the world. "Babe, my company credit card is declining. I tried to order the beluga caviar breakfast." Robert frowned, checking his own phone for banking alerts. Probably just a glitch. Finance department is likely resetting the accounts now that the divorce is final. I told them to sever all ties to Maggie's authorized user accounts. They probably froze everything by mistake. I'll fire the controller when I get in. The town car pulled up to Williams Tower at 8:45. Robert stepped out expecting the usual flurry of paparazzi camped outside to catch photos of the city's most eligible newly single billionaire. There was no one. Just pigeons and a homeless man asking for change. Strange. Robert breezed through the revolving doors into the marble lobby. Usually the reception staff would wave, maybe stand up, demonstrate the deference owed to the man whose name was on the building. Today, Amanda Perez at the desk didn't even look up. She was typing furiously, her face pale, her movements jerky with barely controlled panic. "Good morning, Amanda." She looked up startled. Her eyes widened in what looked like genuine fear. "Mr. Williams, you're here." "Of course I'm here. It's the quarterly board meeting. Is the coffee ready? I want the Jamaican Blue Mountain, not that Colombian crap we served last quarter." I don't know, sir. I was told that—" She trailed off, her phone ringing. She answered it immediately, turning her back to him, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Rude." Robert walked to the private executive elevator and pressed his thumb against the biometric scanner, the one programmed to recognize only C-suite executives. Beep. Access denied. Red light flashed like an alarm. Robert pressed again, harder, as if force could override whatever malfunction was preventing recognition. Beep. Access denied. Contact security. He looked around. No security guards in sight. The lobby felt wrong, too quiet, like a stage set after the actors had left. Impatient, Robert pulled out his wallet and grabbed the master key card he kept for emergencies, a card that overrode all biometric locks that gave him access to every door in the building he owned. He swiped it. The elevator doors slid open. As the elevator ascended to the 40th floor, Robert checked his reflection in the mirrored walls. He fixed his tie, rehearsed his opening line for the board meeting. "Gentlemen, the anchor is cut. The ship is ready to fly." Perfect. Confident. The kind of line that would get quoted in tomorrow's business press. The elevator dinged. The doors opened. Something was wrong. The usual buzz of the executive floor phones ringing, junior analysts rushing with binders, the productive hum of commerce was gone. The open plan office was populated, but everyone was standing completely still. Frozen. They were huddled in clusters, whispering with the urgent intensity of people witnessing disaster. As Robert stepped out of the elevator, the whispering stopped. 50 heads turned to look at him in unison, a choreographed movement that would have been comical if the expressions weren't so uniform. They didn't look at him with reverence or respect. They looked at him with pity and fear. "Get back to work. What is this, a social club? We have a company to run, revenue to generate, shareholders to satisfy." Nobody moved. The silence stretched, broken only by the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Brian Thompson came running out of his office, his face the color of old newspaper. He was sweating profusely. His shirt collar soaked his tie askew. "Mr. Williams, I tried to call you. 17 times. You shouldn't be here." Robert yanked his arm free from Brian's grip. "What are you talking about? I'm the CEO. I have a board meeting in 10 minutes. "Sir, please." Brian's voice was desperate, barely a whisper, his eyes darting toward the double oak doors of the boardroom. "You don't understand. The board meeting started an hour ago, and she's in there." Robert stopped dead, his confidence faltering for the first time. "Who is in there?" Brian's lip quivered, his voice breaking. "The new majority shareholder." Robert laughed, a short, sharp bark of amusement that echoed in the silent office. "Impossible. I own 51% of the voting stock. There is no majority shareholder but me." "Sir, the debt covenants, the Summit deal. You signed the conversion clauses 3 years ago when they bailed us out. If the stock dipped below $180 per share for more than 30 consecutive trading days, the debt converted to equity." A cold spike of adrenaline shot through Robert's gut, his confidence cracking like ice under sudden weight. "What are you saying?" "The stock has been below 180 for 32 days. As of midnight last night, Summit Capital exercised its conversion rights. They now own 65% of Williams Aerospace's voting shares. You're not in control anymore." Robert felt the floor tilt slightly beneath him, the world rearranging itself into shapes he didn't recognize. Summit is a silent partner. They're just money. Who the hell is representing them? Brian didn't answer. He just looked at the boardroom doors with the expression of a man watching his own execution. Robert shoved Brian aside with enough force to make the smaller man stumble. "I'm going to straighten this out. Some lawyer thinks they can hijack my company. Watch me destroy them." He marched down the hallway, his footsteps heavy on the plush carpet, each step an assertion of authority he no longer possessed, but didn't yet know he'd lost. Stop for a second and think about this. How many times have we seen someone mistake kindness for weakness, silence for ignorance? Maggie spent 10 years being invisible in her own company, not because she was weak, but because she was building something Robert couldn't even comprehend. She was 3 moves ahead the entire time. Robert reached the double doors and threw them open with both hands, the oak panels slamming against the walls with a sound like thunder. "All right, who do you think you are?" The boardroom was freezing. That was the first thing Robert noticed. The air conditioning was cranked down to Arctic levels, the kind of cold that made breath visible, that turned the room into a refrigerator designed to preserve what was about to die. The long oval table was occupied by the 12 members of the board of directors. Usually they sat relaxed, sipping Pellegrino, making small talk about golf handicaps and vacation homes. Today they sat rigid backs, straight hands folded on the table like school children awaiting punishment from a headmaster who tolerated no excuses. At the head of the table, Robert's seat, the chair he had occupied for 7 years, sat a figure. The executive chair was turned away from the door, facing the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Manhattan skyline. All Robert could see was the back of a high-backed leather chair and a hand resting on the armrest. A hand with manicured nails painted a deep blood red. I asked a question: "Who is sitting in my chair?" The chair slowly swiveled around with the mechanical precision of a guillotine blade falling. Robert's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His brain tried to process the image before him, tried to reconcile what he was seeing with what he knew to be possible, but the cognitive dissonance was too great. The system crashed. It was Maggie. The messy bun had vanished, replaced by liquid gold, cut sharp as a blade, an asymmetrical bob that cost more than most people's monthly rent and announced its price in every severe angle. The gray cardigan, gone. In its place, white Armani tailored like armor-structured shoulders and nipped waist that transformed her into a warrior preparing for battle. Her face had shed its softness, revealing bone structure that could cut glass. Minimal makeup expertly applied. Defined brows that framed her face like architecture. Contoured cheekbones. A red lip the color of arterial blood. She looked like a predator. She looked like someone who ate men like Robert for breakfast and didn't bother with napkins. "Hello, Robert." Her voice was smooth low, commanding the room with the effortless authority of someone who had been born to it and had simply been waiting for the right moment to claim what was always hers. "Maggie." Robert choked out the name like he was drowning. He looked at the other board members, his eyes wild, searching for allies who had already changed allegiance. "Is this a joke? Why is my ex-wife sitting here? Security? Security answers to me now." Maggie's tone was calm, clinical, the voice of a surgeon explaining a terminal diagnosis. She tapped a perfectly manicured finger on a thick leather binder in front of her. "Sit down, Robert. We have business to discuss." "I'm not sitting down." Robert lunged forward, slamming his hands on the polished mahogany table hard enough to make water glasses jump. "You get out of my chair. You signed the papers. You have no rights here. You walked away. You took your $50,000 and your rusted car, and you walked away." "Actually," a dry, cultured voice spoke up from the corner of the room. Robert whipped his head around. Sitting in the corner, taking meticulous notes on a yellow legal pad, was not Donald Thomas. It was a man Robert recognized from the news, from the cover of the American Lawyer, from the nightmares of every Fortune 500 CEO who had ever faced regulatory investigation. Kenneth Lee. the most expensive corporate litigator in New York, the man who had dismantled Microsoft's monopoly case, the man who made Supreme Court justices nervous, the man whose hourly rate was higher than most people's monthly salary. "Mr. Williams," Kenneth adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses with the precision of a watchmaker. "You are correct that Ms. Wilson signed away her rights to marital assets yesterday in Manhattan Superior Court. However, Summit Capital is not a marital asset." He stood up, walking slowly toward the table. Each footstep deliberate, measured the approach of inevitability. Summit Capital is a separate legal entity funded entirely by the Wilson Family Trust, which was established in 1847, 179 years before you were born, and significantly before your marriage to Ms. Wilson in 2015. Kenneth placed a document on the table in front of Robert with the care of someone handling evidence in a murder trial. As of 12:01 a.m. this morning, April 3rd, Summit Capital exercised its contractual right as outlined in Section 7, Paragraph 14 of the debt restructuring agreement you signed on May 9th, 3 years ago, to convert its debt holdings in Williams Aerospace into Class A voting shares. Robert stared at the document. The words swam before his eyes like fish in murky water shapes he recognized but couldn't quite catch. Summit Capital now holds 65% of all voting shares in this corporation. Ms. Wilson, as the managing director and sole beneficiary of Summit Capital, is now the majority shareholder of Williams Aerospace. You are a minority stakeholder in your own company. Robert looked from Kenneth to Maggie, then back to Kenneth, his mind trying to construct a reality that made sense, that fit the narrative he had built for himself. Your Summit." His voice cracked the confidence that had carried him through life, fracturing like cheap concrete under pressure. Maggie leaned forward slightly, her red lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile but carried all the warmth of a shark circling wounded prey. "I am the managing director and sole beneficiary of Summit Capital, yes. I bought your debt 3 years ago, Robert, when you came home drunk and crying because you had bankrupted the company with that failed X7 thruster engine. When the banks were calling in your loans and you were 72 hours from Chapter 11. When you shoved me against my own desk and screamed that I didn't understand business." Her voice didn't rise, didn't waver. It was a scalpel cutting cleanly through flesh to expose bone. "I saved you, Robert. I bailed you out. I injected $200 million of my family's money to keep this company afloat, while you took credit for the miraculous recovery on CNBC. While you explained to Forbes how your genius and your network had rescued the company from disaster." She stood up slowly, the white suit catching the light like armor forged from ice and determination. "I let you play CEO because it kept the stock stable while I restructured the financials, renegotiated the vendor contracts, and rebuilt the compliance infrastructure you had gutted to fund your bonuses. But you became a liability. Your spending, your erratic behavior, your personnel choices." She gestured to the screen at the far end of the boardroom. A photograph appeared. Jessica Davis laughing on a beach in Miami, the ocean behind her turquoise and perfect, the kind of blue that existed in postcards and lies. "We've been conducting a forensic audit of the company accounts. It seems you've been running personal expenses through the corporate marketing budget." She clicked a remote. The screen changed. Slide 1 bank statement. Williams Aerospace Marketing, consulting fees. Coastal Holdings, LLC, $3 million. Transferred September through December last year. Coastal Holdings is a shell company registered in Delaware under the name of Carol Davis, Jessica's mother. Robert's face turned the color of old milk left too long in the sun. Slide 2 receipts. Miami Beach Villa rental, $18,000. Tiffany & Company diamond earrings, $47,000. Hermes Birkin bag, $32,000. Plaza Athénée Presidential Suite, $12,000 per night times 14 nights. All charged to Williams Aerospace corporate accounts. All categorized as marketing expenses or client entertainment. The board members murmured a collective sound of disgust that filled the room like a wave breaking against rocks. George White, the oldest member of the board, a man who had golfed with Robert at Shinnecock Hills just last month, who had laughed at Robert's jokes and raised glasses to his success, shook his head with the disappointment of a father realizing his son was beyond saving. Embezzlement, Robert. Plain and simple. Criminal misappropriation of corporate funds. It's not embezzlement. Robert's voice was desperate now, the confidence stripped away to reveal panic underneath. It's executive perks. It's standard practice. All CEOs do this. Bezos, Musk, they all use corporate funds for personal expenses. It's how the game is played. No. Maggie's voice was quiet, but it cut through his protestations like a knife through silk. They don't. Slide 3, Federal Wire Fraud Statute. 18 U.S.C. Section 1343. Using corporate funds for personal expenses, then disguising those expenses through fraudulent accounting, constitutes wire fraud. The penalties are severe, up to 20 years in federal prison, fines up to $250,000 per count, and we've identified 47 separate counts. Robert grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself, his knuckles white, his hands shaking. You're bluffing. You can't, this is just intimidation. You're trying to scare me into accepting some settlement. I know how this works, I have lawyers, I have rights. We already have. Maggie's tone didn't change, didn't acknowledge his desperation. She slid a single piece of paper down the long mahogany table with the precision of a dealer in a high-stakes poker game delivering the card that ends everything. It stopped perfectly in front of Robert. Notice of termination for cause. Robert James Williams. Effective immediately. This is your termination notice. Since it is for cause specifically misappropriation of company funds and breach of fiduciary duty, you are not entitled to a severance package. She paused, letting the words settle like ash after a fire. Furthermore, per the morality clause in your employment contract section 12 paragraph 8, which you also signed without reading your unvested stock options, are voided immediately. You forfeit all equity compensation. Every share, every option, every penny of deferred compensation. Gone. Robert stared at the paper. The words blurred together into meaningless shapes, into a language he suddenly couldn't read. Termination. Immediate. Forfeiture of equity. No severance. No. This is insane. I'll sue. I'll drag you through court for the next 20 years. I'll appeal to the Delaware Court of Chancery. I'll fight this with everything I have. With what money? Maggie's question was soft, almost gentle, the way a nurse might ask a terminal patient if they were comfortable. She leaned forward, her hands flat on the table, her eyes locking onto his with the unflinching directness of someone who held all the cards and knew it. You have $50,000, Robert. That's what you gave me yesterday. That's what you insisted was fair, was generous, was more than I deserved. That's what you have in liquid assets right now. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but in the dead silence of the boardroom, it carried like a shout. And since you signed a comprehensive waiver yesterday acknowledging full separation of marital assets, you can't touch my money to pay for your lawyers. The Wilson Family Trust is mine. Summit Capital is mine. Every dollar I used to save this company is mine. You wanted a divorce, Robert. You wanted to be free of the boring wife who held you back, who dragged down your image, who didn't understand your genius. She straightened up, her posture perfect, her expression carved from marble. Well, congratulations. You're free. Robert looked around the room, desperately searching faces for sympathy, for allies, for anyone who would stand with him against this impossible reversal of fortune. They all looked away, every single one. Even George, who had been his friend, who had sponsored him for membership at the country club, who had introduced him to senators and billionaires. They knew where the power was now. They knew how to read a room. They knew how to survive. George. Robert's voice broke the last fragment of his pride shattering. You can't let her do this. We've known each other for 15 years. We played golf last week. You told me I was like a son to you. You can't just abandon me like this. George cleared his throat uncomfortably, his eyes fixed on the table, unable to meet Robert's gaze. The numbers don't lie, Robert. The company is technically insolvent without the Summit Capital injection. Ms. Wilson is the only reason we aren't all sitting in federal prison right now for trading while insolvent. She saved us. She saved you. And you repaid her by stealing from the company and committing securities fraud." He finally looked up and his eyes held something that might have been pity mixed with disgust. "She's the boss now. That's just reality." Robert slumped into the nearest chair, a cheap guest chair, not the executive leather throne he was used to, his legs giving out, his body betraying him. "Why?" he croaked, looking up at Maggie with eyes that were wet, his face crumbling like sand castles at high tide. "Why didn't you just tell me we could have run it together? We were a team once. We built this together. Doesn't that count for anything?" For the first time since he'd entered the room, Maggie's expression changed. The clinical coldness flickered, and beneath it, just for a moment, Robert saw something that looked like pain. But then it was gone, replaced by something harder, something that had been forged in the fire of his contempt and had emerged as steel. "Because you didn't want a partner, Robert. You wanted an audience. You wanted someone to clap when you succeeded and disappear when you failed." She walked around the table slowly, her heels clicking against the polished floor like a countdown. "Do you remember what you said to me 3 years ago when the company was failing and I tried to help you?" Robert said nothing. His throat was too tight, his shame too complete. "You said, 'There is no we. You don't understand business.' You shoved me against my desk. You told me I was only good for cooking dinner and paying the electric bill." She stopped directly in front of him, looking down at where he sat, hunched and broken. "I spent 12 years building this company with you, Robert. I wrote the algorithms that optimized our fuel efficiency. I structured the financing that got us our first NASA contract. I negotiated the vendor agreements that kept our costs 30% below industry standard. I did the work, the real work, the work that actually mattered." Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it now, something sharp enough to draw blood. "And you took credit for all of it. You went on CNBC and talked about your vision, your genius, your company. You never once mentioned my name, not once. Not even when they asked about your team, about who helped you build this. You said I did it myself. I had a vision, and I executed it." Robert opened his mouth to protest, but she held up a hand, silencing him with a gesture. "I didn't need the credit, Robert. I never cared about being famous. I cared about building something that mattered. But then you started to resent me. You started listening to people like Donald Thomas who told you I was dead weight. You started believing I was an embarrassment, a liability, something to be hidden away like a dirty secret." She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, and turned it toward him. It was a text message. From Robert to Jessica. From October. She's like a piece of old furniture. Useful but embarrassing to show to guests. Robert's face went gray, all the blood draining away like water from a broken pipe. "When I stopped clapping, you replaced me. And that's fine. People replace each other all the time. But you also tried to erase me. To rewrite history so that I never existed, so that the company was solely your creation. And that I can't forgive." She put the phone back in her pocket with deliberate care. "So no, Robert. We couldn't have run it together. Because you never saw me as an equal. You saw me as a tool. And when I stopped being useful, you threw me away." Maggie straightened up and turned to the 2 security guards standing by the door. Large men in dark suits that Robert didn't recognize, new hires, people loyal to the new regime. "Escort Mr. Williams out of the building. Make sure he doesn't stop at his office. Everything in there is now evidence in the pending forensic audit." "What?" "My office." "You can't. My personal belongings are in there. My photos, your company-issued belongings." Kenneth's voice cut through the protest with surgical precision. "The laptop is corporate property. The files are corporate property. Even the family photos in the frames were printed on the corporate printer using corporate ink and corporate photo paper purchased with corporate funds." One of the security guards stepped forward, his expression neutral but his presence intimidating. "Mr. Williams, please hand over your badge, your phone, and your laptop." "My phone? That's my personal phone. I've had that number for 10 years. The bill is paid by Williams Aerospace. It's company property. And we need to preserve it as evidence, specifically the text messages regarding the unauthorized transfers to Ms. Davis." Robert's hand trembled as he reached into his pocket. His fingers closed around the phone, the device that held his entire life, every contact, every email, every text message that proved he was someone who mattered. "You can't take my phone. I have personal information. I have contacts. I have—" "Hand it over, Robert." Maggie's voice was flat, emotionless, the tone of someone who had run out of patience for theatrics. "Or I'll have the security team retrieve it by force. Your choice. You have 5 seconds." Shaking with rage and humiliation, and the dawning realization that he had lost everything, Robert pulled out his iPhone and slammed it on the table hard enough to crack the screen. He threw his badge down next to it, the plastic clattering against the wood. "I don't have the laptop. It's at the plaza. We'll retrieve it. Please escort Mr. Williams to the lobby. Use the main elevator. I want the staff to see him leave." Robert was marched out of the boardroom by the 2 guards, one on each side, their hands hovering near his elbows, as if ready to catch him if he collapsed. As he walked through the executive floor, every single employee stopped what they were doing and watched. Some were crying, some looked angry, but most looked satisfied, their faces showing the quiet vindication of people who had been mistreated and were now witnessing justice. Robert had not been kind during his reign. He had screamed at assistants for bringing him the wrong coffee. He had fired people on whims, ending careers because he was having a bad day. He had made junior analysts work through Christmas while he vacationed in the Hamptons, had called them at midnight to demand revisions on presentations he would never read. They had feared him, hated him, endured him because they needed their paychecks. They didn't anymore. The elevator doors opened. Robert stepped in, flanked by guards who stared straight ahead as if he didn't exist. As the doors began to close, he caught one last glimpse of the executive floor. Brian Thompson stood near his office watching. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Brian looked away first, turning back to his computer, already adapting to the new reality. The elevator descended in silence. When the doors opened in the lobby, the scene had changed. The press had arrived, a sea of cameras and microphones, reporters shouting questions, photographers jostling for position. Someone had tipped them off. Almost certainly Maggie's PR team, orchestrating the public destruction with the same precision she had applied to the corporate takeover. The moment Robert stepped onto the sidewalk of 6th Avenue, the questions exploded like artillery fire. "Mr. Williams, is it true you've been fired for embezzlement?" "Robert, is Jessica Davis being investigated for fraud?" "Mr. Williams, comment on Margaret Wilson taking over as CEO. Is it true you're bankrupt? Did you steal $3 million from your own company to buy gifts for your mistress?" Robert tried to push through the crowd, shielding his face from the flashes that came like strobe lights in a nightmare. His hands were up, protecting his eyes, his dignity already gone, but his instinct to hide still operational. "No comment. Get out of my face. I have nothing to say. This is a hostile takeover. This is corporate warfare. You're all getting played." He reached for the door handle of his town car, the vehicle that was parked at the curb, where it always was, where Gary Young always waited for him with the engine running and the back seat ready. He yanked the door. Locked. Gary, open the door." Robert pounded on the window with his fist, the sound hollow against bulletproof glass. Gary, his longtime chauffeur, a man who had driven Robert for 6 years, who knew his coffee order and his preferred route to the office, and had picked him up drunk from clubs at 3 in the morning without judgment or comment, rolled down the window, just an inch, just enough for his voice to carry through. "I'm sorry, Mr. Williams. I've been ordered to return the vehicle to the company garage immediately. You're not authorized for company transport anymore." His voice carried genuine regret, but also the firmness of a man who had made a decision and would stand by it. "Gary, it's me. Open the damn door. I'll pay you myself. Cash. I'll double your salary. Just open the door." "I can't, sir. I have a pension to think about, a family to support. Ms. Wilson is very strict about unauthorized use of corporate assets. I'm sorry." Gary rolled the window back up, cutting off Robert's protests. The engine started. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving Robert standing alone in a cloud of exhaust fumes, his arms still outstretched toward a vehicle that was already half a block away. The paparazzi went absolutely wild. Billionaire CEO left on the curb after firing. It was the money shot the image that would be on the front page of the New York Post tomorrow on TMZ within the hour, trending on Twitter within minutes with hashtags about karma and downfall and the wages of hubris. Robert Williams, master of the universe, rocket scientist, billionaire playboy, standing on a Manhattan sidewalk, sweating through his $8,000 suit, abandoned by his own driver, reduced to nothing. Robert stood there for a long moment, breathing hard, his mind racing through options that didn't exist, searching for escape routes that had all been blocked. He needed to get away from the cameras, away from the questions, away from the witnesses, to his humiliation. He reached into his pocket for his phone to call an Uber to summon some vestige of the convenience that had defined his life. His pocket was empty. The phone had been confiscated upstairs. Shit, 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 shit. He turned and ran. Just ran. Down 6th Avenue, his Italian leather shoes slapping against the pavement, his jacket flapping behind him like broken wings. The paparazzi chased him for half a block before giving up. They had their photos. They had the story. There was no point in pursuing a man who had already been destroyed. Robert ducked into the first business he saw, a Starbucks on the corner of 47th and 6th, generic and anonymous, the kind of place he would never have entered when he was somebody. He stumbled up to the counter, breathing heavily, sweating his hair, disheveled, his tie askew. The barista, a young woman with purple hair and a septum piercing, and an expression that suggested she had seen everything and been impressed by none of it, stared at him with the blank neutrality of minimum wage employment. Coffee, black, venti. Her voice was flat bored. That'll be $4.50. Robert pulled out his wallet with hands that shook. He extracted his Black American Express Centurion card, the card made of titanium, the card with no spending limit, the card that said, "I am better than you and always will be." He swiped it. Beep. Declined. He swiped it again, pressing harder as if force could override whatever error the system was making. Beep. Declined. Try this one. He pulled out a Visa signature card, the one he used for everyday purchases when he didn't want to flash the Centurion. Beep. Declined. Card reported stolen. The barista's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in her professional indifference. Sir, it says your card was reported stolen. I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. There are people waiting. It's not stolen. It's my card. I'm Robert Williams. I'm the CEO of Williams Aerospace. His voice rose, echoing in the small space. People in line behind him were staring now, pulling out their phones, recognizing him from the news, from the photos that were already circulating online. He pulled out a third card. Chase Sapphire Reserve. Beep. Declined. Contact issuer. Robert stared at the card reader in disbelief, his mind trying to process a reality where money didn't work, where plastic rectangles that had always opened doors now opened nothing. Maggie. She had frozen everything. Not just the company cards, but the personal ones too. The bank must have flagged all his accounts pending the fraud investigation. She had mentioned the criminal case she was building brick by brick. He looked in his wallet. Cash section empty. He never carried cash. Rich people didn't need cash. Cash was for people who couldn't get credit. Sir, if you can't pay, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. You're holding up the line. Someone behind him whispered loudly enough to be heard. Yo, isn't that the dude from the news? The one who got caught stealing from his own company? The one who got dumped by his wife and she took everything? His face burned. He turned and walked out of the Starbucks, leaving behind the coffee and his dignity and the last shred of his self-respect. It started to rain. Of course it did, because the universe had a sense of irony and wasn't subtle about deploying it. Robert Williams, former CEO, former billionaire, former master of the universe, walked 40 blocks in a torrential downpour from Midtown to Hudson Yards. His $8,000 Tom Ford suit was plastered to his skin, the wool heavy with water, the tailoring ruined. His Italian leather Ferragamo shoes squelched with every step, the soles separating from the uppers, water seeping in to soak his socks. Water ran down his face, mixing with sweat and something that might have been tears, but could also have been just rain. It was impossible to tell, and it didn't matter anyway. People on the street steered clear of him, this muttering, soaking wet man with wild eyes and a 1,000-yard stare, this creature that looked like it had crawled out of a disaster zone. Every billboard he passed seemed to mock him. A Rolex ad, time well spent. A Mercedes billboard, the best or nothing. An American Express ad, don't leave home without it. He had none of those things anymore. He was walking home, in the rain, like a peasant. He walked past his favorite restaurants, Le Bernardin Percé 11, Madison Park places where the maitre d' had known his name, where they had kept his table, where he had signed bills without looking at the total, because the total didn't matter when money was infinite. He couldn't afford to eat at any of them now. He probably couldn't afford a slice of pizza. By the time he reached Hudson Yards, his feet were bleeding inside his ruined shoes. He could feel the blisters bursting with every step, feel the raw skin rubbing against wet leather. He wasn't going to the Tribeca penthouse. Maggie had said it was a crime scene being torn apart by forensic accountants looking for more evidence to bury him with. He was going to Jessica's apartment, the one he paid for. The one where he kept spare clothes and toiletries, where he could shower and change and pretend for a few hours that his life wasn't ending. Robert managed to slip past the doorman by tailgating a delivery driver, merging into the flow of people entering the building as if he belonged there. He rode the elevator to the 55th floor, shivering uncontrollably, leaving puddles of water on the polished marble floor. He banged on Jessica's door with the flat of his hand, loud enough to disturb neighbors, but too desperate to care. No answer. He banged again, harder, his palm stinging from the impact. "Jessica, it's me. Open up. I need help." It took a long time for her to open the door, long enough that he started to wonder if she was even home, if she had already fled, if he was alone in ways he hadn't yet fully comprehended. When she finally opened the door, she wasn't wearing the silk lingerie he usually found her in the expensive sets he had bought her from boutiques in Soho. She was dressed in jeans and an old NYU sweatshirt, surrounded by half-packed Louis Vuitton suitcases that stood open like mouths waiting to be fed. "Robert!" She looked at him like he was a drowned rat that had crawled out of a sewer, like he was something distasteful she needed to dispose of quickly before it contaminated her space. "Jesus, look at you. You're soaking my floor. You can't be here." "Let me in, Jess." Robert pushed past her into the apartment without waiting for permission. "It's been a hell of a morning. I need your phone. Mine was seized. Maggie is pulling some kind of insane hostile takeover. She froze the accounts temporarily, but I'll have this fixed by Monday. I just need to call Donald, get him started on the appeals. This isn't over. It's just the opening move." "It's not temporary, is it, Robert?" Jessica's voice was shrill, stripped of the baby doll coo she usually used with him, the practiced breathiness that had made him feel young and desired. "What are you talking about? Of course it's temporary. This is just corporate maneuvering, board politics. I've dealt with worse. I'll have my lawyers—" "I saw the news." Jessica held up her iPhone, the screen showing a photo of him being escorted out of Williams Tower by security guards. The headline read, "The Williams Bust CEO Fired for Fraud as Ex-Wife Seizes Control." "They're saying you embezzled millions." "Millions, Robert, to pay for all this." She waved a hand around the apartment at the furniture he'd bought, the art on the walls he'd selected, the life he'd funded. "They're saying you're broke. Worse than broke. They're saying you're facing indictment. Federal prison. 20 years. His stomach turned over, bile rising. "Jess, babe, listen to me. It's complicated. It's corporate maneuvering. Maggie is being vindictive because of the affair. She's weaponizing the legal system. I have money elsewhere. Offshore accounts. Investments she doesn't know about. We'll go to Malibu, we'll ride this out until the lawyers sort it. It'll be fine. We'll be fine." "With what money?" Jessica's voice rose, all pretense of affection stripped away. "My card got declined at Sephora an hour ago, Robert. My card. The black Amex you gave me. The one you said had an unlimited limit. Do you know how embarrassing that was? The girl at the register tried to run it 3 times in front of a line of people. Everyone was staring. Everyone was judging." Robert stared at her, his life collapsing, his future evaporating, criminal charges looming, and she was upset about getting declined at a makeup store. "Jessica, I need help. I need a place to stay tonight. Just tonight. The penthouse is locked down. I can't access any of my properties. I don't have anywhere else to go." Jessica laughed. It was a cruel, ugly sound, nothing like the musical giggle he remembered. "Here? Are you kidding me? The landlord was just here an hour ago, Robert. Apparently the lease for this apartment is in the company name. Williams Aerospace's name, which means it's in Maggie's name now." Robert's stomach dropped the floor opening beneath him. "I have 48 hours to vacate before they change the locks. I'm packing. I'm going to my sister's place in Jersey City until I figure out my next move. And my next move definitely doesn't involve a broke felon." "But I thought you loved me. You said Maggie was dragging me down. You said we were soulmates. You said when the divorce was final we'd start our real life together." "I loved the lifestyle, Robert." Jessica's voice was flat cold, completely devoid of warmth. "I loved the private jets to Miami. I loved the black Amex with no limit. I loved the tables at Carbone and the boxes at the opera. I loved being the woman on your arm at galas where senators and billionaires remembered my name." She stepped closer to him, and he could see genuine disgust in her eyes. "I didn't sign up for this. You're nobody now, Robert. Actually, you're worse than nobody. You're a liability, a criminal. If they're investigating you for fraud, they might come after me next for receiving stolen goods. They might say I knew. They might make me testify against you." She shoved him toward the door hard, or maybe he was just that weak now. "You need to leave, now, before I call the cops and tell them an intruder is harassing me." "Jessica, please." Slam! The heavy door shut in his face. He heard the deadbolt slide home with a solid thunk that sounded like a coffin being nailed shut. Robert stood in the hallway staring at the closed door. Water dripped from his hair, forming a puddle at his feet. He leaned his forehead against the wood, the surface cool against his skin. He was colder now than he had been outside in the rain. Maggie hadn't just taken his company. She had stripped away the illusion of his entire life. The respect, the fear, the love. None of it had been real. It had all been bought with money that wasn't even his, built on a foundation of debt and lies and the silent labor of a woman he had dismissed as furniture. Robert had asked the wrong question in that hallway. Not who are you, but who was I? He'd spent a decade taking for granted the one person who saw him clearly, and when she stopped pretending to be blind, he called it betrayal. The rain kept falling outside 45 floors below, washing the city clean of evidence. Somewhere in Manhattan, Maggie sat in the corner office that used to be his reviewing contracts for a future he would never see. And Robert stood in a stranger's hallway learning what it meant to be invisible. He turned away from the door and walked toward the elevator, each step leaving wet footprints on expensive carpet that wasn't his anymore, had never really been his. The elevator doors closed. His reflection stared back at him from the polished steel, a drowned man, already a ghost. The descent felt endless. When the doors finally opened to the lobby, he stepped out into a world that had no place for him anymore. The doorman who had let him tailgate in now watched him with the careful neutrality of someone documenting a trespasser. Robert walked out into the rain and kept walking, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant understanding that this wasn't temporary, wasn't fixable, wasn't anything but the ending he'd written himself, one contemptuous word at a time. Somewhere behind him in an apartment he'd paid for with stolen money suitcases were being packed. Somewhere above him in an office he'd lost to his own arrogance, his name was being removed from everything he'd built. And somewhere deep in the machinery of justice paperwork was moving forward, indictments being filed, warrants being issued, prison cells being prepared for men who thought they were too important to fall. The universe, it turned out, had a sense of irony after all. And it wasn't subtle about collecting debts.